This is Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth. For competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty. For the Republic.
I'm the guy who at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Klayman, special prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. We have a great show today. We have former Congressman Bob Barr, my very good friend and a courageous individual on the show, to talk about what's been happening, not with regard just solely to Robert Mueller and that bogus investigation that he's been conducting into Russian collusion, so-called Russian collusion, but also developments in the Bundy trial. But I want to say at the outset, and wishing everybody a happy new year, that we're going into 2018 with perhaps the biggest scandal in American history. And it really hasn't come out yet. But you have to ask yourself the question, why have successive Democrat and Republican presidential administrations covered up what's been happening with North Korea? Are you telling me that our intelligence agencies are that bad that they didn't know that the Koreans were very close to having nuclear weapons and in fact now have them and can deliver them with nuclear weapons, nuclear missiles that is? This is something that we're going to be looking at Freedom Watch in the next year. We're going to be uncovering things, turning over the rocks, because people have to be held accountable here inside of our government, particularly our intelligence agencies, who spend their time spying on hundreds of millions of Americans, but are not doing their job overseas. And if they are doing their job, they're covering up this threat to our very nature and our very foundation of this country. We're under the potential for a nuclear holocaust in 2018. Coming from North Korea and also Iran. But let me talk about the Robert Mueller investigation. As I've said many times, he's not a man of integrity. He's part of the Washington establishment. He's part of the Washington swamp. How do you think he got his job as former FBI director? How do you think he got his job as special counsel? Basically, you have to suck up to both sides in Washington, D.C., not just the Democrats in this instance, but the Republican establishment as well. And this week we learned that he's marching on with this bogus, non-meritorious investigation against President Trump. He's out to destroy President Trump and his presidency. He's out to take away our vote, who voted for this president, who I think in his first year did even more than Ronald Reagan, and I love Ronald Reagan. When I go out to the Reagan Library in Simi Valley, California, I still tear over watching that, because he was truly a great president and he was a great person. Now, Trump may be a little harsh and he sometimes can be crude, but he's getting the job done, and he's a sign of the times, because you know what? You have to fight the left these days with leftist tactics. You can't roll over. It's not the same as it used to be. It's either them or us, and I mean legally, not violently. But either we take them out or they're going to take us out. It's as simple as that. They're vicious, they're cruel, they're mean, they're unscrupulous, they're unethical, and in fact, they're criminals by and large. And I mean that. Anybody who has a leftist ideology these days, to me, is my enemy. And I'll tell you something. We are facing a crossroads here with this Robert Mueller investigation. Now he wants to get into the banking records of everyone at Deutsche Bank. Trump's banking records, everybody's banking records, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, everyone. You know who Deutsche Bank was? Deutsche Bank was the bank that financed the Holocaust. They actually paid for the concentration camps. I took them on years ago when President Clinton and his lovely wife Hillary got a below-market loan from Deutsche Bank. And we, in fact, killed that below-market loan for their first house, so much so that President Clinton attacked me at a press conference. You can find that on our website at freedomwatchusa.org. Now, Deutsche Bank probably has done some rather illegal things. I frankly don't believe that President Trump has done illegal things when he was a businessman. I don't know about Jared Kushner, but it has nothing to do with the president in any event. But Mueller is getting into that. And these constant rumors of indicting his son-in-law, of trashing everybody in his family, of previously indicting General Mike Flynn, who has been a hero to this country in the past, and Manafort. I don't know what Manafort did, but they busted into his house. They indicted him for things that had nothing to do with Trump. Someone has got to stop Mueller, and we are doing everything we can legally with lawsuits, with bar complaints, with anything that we can muster to take this guy out. Because Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, he's a Democrat. He was the U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland when Obama was president. He covered up the fusion GPS scandal. He covered up Uranium One. It was being handled out of his district by no coincidence. And this is the guy who is looking over the shoulder of Mueller and doing nothing. He testified about 2 weeks ago. He thinks Mueller's doing a fine job. He's a man of integrity. Well, I'll tell you something. Both of them are political hacks, and they need to go. And if there's one thing that the president should do, he may not want to fire Mueller for political reasons, but he can certainly have Attorney General Jeff Sessions fire Rosenstein and get somebody in there that isn't a political hack. I'm an alumnus of the Justice Department. I believed in the Justice Department. Now, when I was there as a young lawyer, I left, and ultimately I started Judicial Watch to become the People's Justice Department. And when I left that Justice Department, I went into private practice, and later I started Freedom Watch after the campaign. So I hope that you go to freedomwatchusa.org, freedomwatchusa.org, to sign up for what we do, because we'll give you those reports every week. Now, there's another problem here. It's Trump's lawyers. I call them the Three Stooges. You have Ty Cobb, great-grandson of the famous baseball player, Ty Cobb. Well, this Ty Cobb strikes out, unfortunately. You have Jay Sekulow. Jay's a nice guy. He's a good religious rights lawyer, but he's out of his league here. No pun intended. Him and Ty Cobb. He's not a criminal defense lawyer. And then you have John Dowd, who's simply Republican establishment. They're taking hits. They roll over to everything that goes on with regard to Mueller. And now they say that this investigation is going to be over by Christmas. Well, you know what? We're past Christmas. It's not over. And we're going into 2018. So go to freedomwatchusa.org. Support our cause. Sign the petition to support our lawsuit against Mueller, to legally take him out for the illegal grand jury leaks that have been occurring daily. These are crimes, and no one does anything. No one says anything but Freedom Watch. My former group, Judicial Watch, they file Freedom of Information Act requests primarily. They get documents, but they're not trial lawyers. At least they're not experienced trial lawyers. You need someone like Larry Klayman and Freedom Watch to get the job done, because we don't have a Justice Department. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has put his head in the sand with regard to Mueller, with regard to the various scandals of the Clintons, the email scandal of the private email server, Fusion GPS, and Uranium One. You need a hard-hitting group, so please support us. We need your strong financial support. So go to freedomwatchusa.org. And I wouldn't be doing this advertising if we didn't need it, because we are small. We don't have the ability to have lots of money to fight these people. We need your help to do that. freedomwatchusa.org. And let me tell you about Congress, too. They do a lot of investigations. They make a lot of noise. The Republicans up there, the establishment, they go on Fox News. They pound their chest. They talk about how great they are. But in the end, we know they've done nothing. Look at the 8 years during Obama, much of which they controlled Congress. A lot of hearings, but no action. You have Jason Chaffetz out there now doing political commentary. He was head of the Government Oversight and Reform Committee. Well, what did he do when he was the chairman of that? What does Trey Gowdy do other than sound good on TV? Zip. In fact, Trey Gowdy helped cover up the Benghazi scandal and exonerated Hillary Clinton. So you can't be fooled. Look, I love Fox News. I love Newsmax. I'm on Newsmax frequently. I love some of these other stations like One America Network and I-24. There are conservative stations that are coming out that are talking clearly. But you know what? It's Freedom Watch that does the heavy lifting. Go to freedomwatchusa.org. It's freedomwatchusa.org. And one of the reasons that I have this radio show is because I talk clearly, is that even Fox News doesn't want to hear this clear message. It's shaded. As much as the good as they've done, they don't go the extra mile because of the potential retaliation in the political system against them. And thank God they exist. Thank God we have a Newsmax, and I can talk clearly on Newsmax. And I write a blog, Clayman's Court. Go to that and see what we do. Thank God for WorldNetDaily.com, because I write columns. You're going to see one tonight about the Bundys. Go there. It's going to be over the weekend. But we need your strong support because, frankly, the American people have been left defenseless, and we don't have a line of defense. So I want to send your attention in the direction of freedomwatchusa.org and listen to this station every week. We're going to be talking about the Bundy case, major developments there. This is the case of the century. Everything that's good about this country, everything that's bad about the country as it currently exists with this leftist takeover, attempted takeover, you can see in the Bundy case. And there are some major developments, and that's why we're going to have Congressman Bob Barr on here, former congressman, probably the only courageous person I've ever worked with on Capitol Hill. Of course, you know that we helped impeach President Clinton years ago. And we're going to talk about what's been going on with Bundy in the next segment, because Bob actually met with Cliven Bundy and I on several occasions over the last year. So listen to what we have to say about this case, because it's important for your future. We'll be right back.
Dangerous.
You don't care. Use the court and the law.
Lethal.
This is bad.
Special prosecutor.
Very bad.
Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
Joining me now is former Congressman Bob Barr, my very good friend, someone who I have a lot of respect for. He's someone who stands for ethics, morality, justice. When he was a congressman from Georgia, he did what needed to be done. He didn't just play games to get on Fox News and the other cable networks. He put his money where his mouth was, and we worked together to impeach President Bill Clinton. Of course, the Republican establishment in the U.S. Senate bailed out. They let him off the hook, and Bill and Hillary Clinton have come back with a vengeance, and they're still out there today. But I want to talk about now what's been happening in the Bundy case. Just give you a little introduction, because Bob wrote an excellent article this week about the Bundy lawsuit, basically the prosecution, is that the prosecutors in that case, the acting U.S. Attorney Steve Myre, M-A-H-R-E, his assistant U.S. attorneys, Dan Sheese, and an individual by the name, I always forget her name, Ahmed, A-H-M-E-D, they have been caught with their hand in the proverbial cookie jar. They have been suppressing evidence. They have been sitting on top of the Bureau of Land Management and the FBI's destruction of evidence. They withheld exculpatory evidence. That's evidence that could work to acquit the Bundys. And they were caught. During the first 3 witnesses of trial, it came out, not only did the FBI lie and the BLM lie, but they actually destroyed evidence. And now we have a whistleblower that's come forward by the name of Larry Wooten, he's from the Bureau of Land Management, and he has documented that the Bundys were even on a kill list along with some of the other defendants in this case. They had targets on their head with big X's on them. The people inside of Bureau of Land Management disparaged the Mormon faith. They called the Bundys retards. We now know that the Bundys were surrounded by snipers, if you can believe that, before anything happened at Bunkerville. Basically, they were out to harm the Bundys, if not kill the Bundys. Now, the judge on the case, Gloria Navarro, who is a hand-picked appointee of former Senator Harry Reid, that corrupt senator from Nevada who has retired, but he was the one that called the Bundys domestic terrorists. Well, you know what? They weren't the terrorists. It was the Obama administration that were the terrorists, along with these prosecutors. Even she has now had to declare a mistrial. And there's a hearing on January 8th to determine whether there'll be a mistrial with prejudice. That means whether this case will be ended. The legal briefs were filed last Friday in this regard. And I'll tell you something. There's a good chance that this may be dismissed. But on top of that, we finally, after a year of lobbying, got the Attorney General to conduct a review of what's been going on because he's been forced to come out of his cave. He's been hibernating like a bear in Northern California. He didn't want to deal with it, but now he has to deal with it. And I commend him for doing that. And I think that what caused that was a lawsuit that I filed in part 2 weeks ago, which was to force the Justice Department's Office of Professional Responsibility and Inspector General to conduct an investigation into the gross prosecutorial abuse, misconduct in this case, which is sufficient to have the superseding indictment dismissed. All of this has been happening. And of course, the Bundy case, to be it brief, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bob to talk about his observations, is so important because this is why we fought the revolution in 1776. You can't have the government threatening to kill you. You can't have the government busting into your house, beating up your sister, tasing your two sons, seriously harming your dog, killing your cattle, burying them in a secret mass grave because they want to force you off the land because you haven't paid grazing fees, which aren't due to the U.S. government in any event, because the land is really owned by Nevada. And we're going to be bringing a lawsuit to get a declaratory judgment in that regard very shortly. The federal government claims to own 85% of the land in Nevada. Well, just out of common sense, how can you be a state if the federal government owns 85% of the land? Federal government held the land in trust for a short while, but it reverted to the state of Nevada, as well as the states of Utah, states of Arizona, states of California, and other states in the West when these states were created. So this is a super important case, and this is what King George III did in the days leading up to the Revolution. Terrorized the colonialists, basically heavy-handed abuse, misapplication of the law, and what happened to the Bundys was illegal. And I got to tell you, Bob has met with Cliven Bundy on a few occasions. He can assess the mettle of the man. This is a fine family, and the rest of the family is a fine family too, and they're standing up for your rights. I want you to go to ClivenBundyDefenseFund.org, ClivenBundyDefenseFund.org. We'll be right back.
And now, 4 words that make corrupt politicians make wee-wee in their little pants.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
Be the one who makes our country great again. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate.
Now that we've talked about the background of the importance of the Bundy case, the prosecution in Las Vegas, Nevada, that was going on for 3 weeks before the judge stopped it, and we learned of all this prosecutorial abuse, the lying, the cheating, the destruction of evidence by the FBI and the Bureau of Land Management. Of course, we know what the FBI has done with regard to other scandals recently concerning the Clintons and others. I want to bring Bob Barr in to discuss the article that he wrote this week, the importance of the Bundy case, what it means for all Americans. I want him to give his observations, having met with Cliven Bundy with me in the federal prison in Pahrump, and to get a take on why this truly is the case of the century, why this case means so much, not just for the Bundy family, this very fine family, but also for all of us Americans. And I do want you to go to ClivenBundyDefenseFund.org and contribute to our cause. This has been costly, and I'm sitting out there in Nevada for a very long period of time. This case is not over. We need to put it away, and we also need to have a court declare, a Nevada court, that the land belongs to Nevada, not to the federal government, So the federal government cannot go in there anymore and oppress the Bundy family or any people in Nevada and the surrounding states of Utah, Arizona, California, and others. Bob, I want to get your take on this because you've been very close to it. You follow it. You're a believer. You're someone who believes in the Constitution.
Thank you, Larry, and I appreciate the opportunity once again to be with you and your listeners on the show. I wrote an article earlier this week in townhall.com, and in that article I call on President Trump to immediately order Attorney General Sessions to completely drop the prosecution of the Bundys and the other defendants in this case. I also think it's extremely important that the president order a full and complete investigation, not only of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Nevada, which has overall responsibility for what has happened in this case. They can't shift it off to the investigative agencies, but the investigative agencies, such as the Bureau of Land Management and the Department of the Interior and the FBI, need to be investigated as well with regard to what happened here. Because if we don't shed some light on what happened in this case among all these different agencies, then we're doomed to have it happen again and again. And President Trump, I know, understands the importance of this. He spoke out on the issue of land rights and individual rights in Nevada itself during the campaign last year. So I hope that your many listeners echo our sentiments here and call on the administration to do what's right and drop this prosecution and investigate these agencies fully.
Well, and, you know, I commend Attorney General Jeff Sessions for finally doing what he should have done a long time ago. You know, I've been really hard on him in the last year. I spoke with him, Bob, going back about 10 or 11 months right after he was confirmed. I spoke with him on his cell phone. He called back. He was very courteous. And I said, look, Jeff, I've known him over the years. You do, too. You know him a little better than I do. I had a case with him in Mobile, Alabama as a young lawyer and saw him over the years at various events for conservatives. But he promised me that he would review the case, and he never did. And then when I tried to set up an interview with him, a meeting, and his deputy, Rod Rosenstein, I was told to send memoranda to them detailing what was going on. And at that point, we knew about the prosecutorial misconduct. We knew about information that had been hidden. We knew about heavy-handedness in the way this whole thing was being handled because the prosecutors, number one, opposed speedy trial. They claimed this was a complex case. The judge overrode the Speedy Trial Act, which requires a quick trial in a criminal case. And this thing dragged on for over a year and 8 months before Cliven and his sons even came to trial. Not only that, the prosecutors opposed my entry pro hac vice into the case. I've been doing whatever I can in any other capacity here, but that's a sacrosanct Sixth Amendment right to come in. Well, this judge that's sitting on the case, Navarro, readily agreed because she's an appointee of President Barack Obama. I've had a legal knife, so to speak, to the throat of Obama for 8 years. And Harry Reid, he was the one who recommended her appointment. She went along with all of this. But Sessions sat on his hands and did nothing. Instead, he made a statement at the U.S. Attorney's Office when he was out in Nevada doing a press conference on sanctuary cities that he was not taking sides. Well, now he's been forced to take sides because we know that this massive prosecutorial misconduct has come out. Documents have been hidden. Documents have been destroyed. The prosecutors actually got up and lied to the court and the jury, claiming that there were no snipers at the Bundy Ranch at Bunkerville when there were. They were out there setting the Bundys up before anything ever happened, trying to create a condition where they would be indicted. It is these prosecutors who ultimately should be indicted and tried. Of course, that's not likely to happen because everybody protects everybody and scratches everybody else's back in Washington, D.C., but I have actually filed complaints with the Office of Professional Responsibility, with the Inspector General of the Justice Department. I brought a lawsuit to force the Attorney General to take action. And while the judge and Obama appointee would not order that a week and a half ago, I'd asked the judge, who I believe otherwise is an honest and good man, to contact Sessions to urge him to do an investigation. he left the bench looking very troubled. He may have done that because, judges as well as lawyers, when we see the crimes are being committed, we have an ethical duty to inform appropriate authorities. So Bob's article was super important, and coming from former Congressman Bob Barr, someone who is well known as having a great deal of integrity, in addition to what I've done and what other people have done, was very important. So Bob, I want to commend you for that. And I want to get your further thoughts on, your having met with Cliven Bundy and what kind of a man he is.
I think the human element here is very important, Larry, because a lot of folks that might read a little bit or hear a story about the case from time to time don't know Cliven Bundy and his family as you and I do, especially you. You've had a lot more dealings with him than I have. But I think it's important for the American people to understand that this is a man, Cliven Bundy, and his family, a man of integrity, of intelligence. He studied history. He studied the law. Even though he's not a lawyer, he understands the law. He understands the Constitution. And he has put together, because I've sat and listened to him while he was incarcerated in Pahrump for an extended period of time, almost 2 years now. And he understands what's at stake here, and he's very eloquent in putting together the case. And I'm a little bit optimistic now, Larry, because of what you've done, and now that a mistrial has been declared, that we may finally see a little bit of constitutional light at the end of the tunnel. This case raises, as you've already alluded to, legal issues and constitutional issues on many levels. I mean, I know as a former U.S. attorney, and you know as a lawyer and a former prosecutor yourself, that it's absolutely understood that the government has an absolute obligation to turn over exculpatory or potentially exculpatory material to the defense on a timely basis. And it is up to the U.S. attorney or the assistant U.S. attorney to make sure that the agencies involved, whether it's the FBI or the Bureau of Land Management, have done so. They not only failed to do that in this case, but in an instance, Larry, that I've never seen as blatant as in this case, they took action against these innocent Americans. They deliberately destroyed evidence. They deliberately withheld evidence. And if Judge Navarro has an ounce of legal or constitutional decency or understanding, she certainly, after January 8th, when, as you mentioned, there's going to be a hearing or briefs are due, will dismiss this case with prejudice so that the government cannot continue to harass these people. And in the meantime, President Trump needs to ensure that the Attorney General launches a complete and thorough, far-ranging investigation of this matter.
You're right, Bob. This is a huge scandal. And here's the risk, is that Navarro, who in her heart does not want to let this case go. I mean, she is the disciple of Harry Reid. Harry Reid reportedly was trying to sell the land through his son Rory in downtown Las Vegas, another lawyer, to Chinese environmental interests. Obama was trying to assert federal control over all the lands through the Bureau of Land Management. This is the leftist view of things, that the federal government should control everything. And if this case is not dismissed with prejudice, Cliven could wind up in prison, for another year to 2 years. And not only that, once this evidence is produced, it may never come in front of the jury as to what happened. And as a former U.S. attorney, how things can work and how judges can manipulate trials. And I'll tell you something. After the mistrial was declared in front of the jury, they polled the jurors, some of the defense lawyers, and said, how would you have voted? There were only 3 witnesses. The trial had only been going on for a week and a half. 9 of the 12 said they would have acquitted at that point. And that's really important. But we may never get a chance to present the evidence of the document destruction and suppression if there's a mistrial, because the judge may say, well, that's all moot. Now we move on. You've got the deck of cards to play from. And that's why this needs to be ended now. And we also we're going to be filing a lawsuit to have the land declared Nevada land so the BLM can't come back like Darth Vader and the Force. So, we got a lot of things ahead of us. And I don't know if you know this, Bob, but 2 of the prior defendants in prior trials, because there were 2 prior trials, who were acquitted, without any evidence. I filed federal tort claims actions for malicious prosecution against our so-called government because these people were persecuted simply because they came to the Bundy ranch armed, fearing that they may be attacked just like the Bundys were attacked. They didn't harm the hair on the head of anybody. They didn't point guns at anybody. But you have a sacrosanct Second Amendment right. Bob, you sit on the board of National Rifle Association. You know what I'm talking about. You were a former U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. You know what I'm talking about. That's why this case is so important.
Well, it is, Larry. It raises constitutional questions that are found throughout the Bill of Rights, not only the Second Amendment, the First Amendment. We now know, based on the information that's come out, that one of the reasons the government targeted the Bundys was an anti-Mormon bias. There are certainly Sixth Amendment issues, Fifth Amendment issues. As I say, and I was a U.S. attorney in the Northern District for 4 years under Presidents Reagan and Bush 1. And, I had to deal with occasional issues involving problematic behavior on the part of a law enforcement agency or official. But I have never, ever, Larry, seen the systemic, deliberate, and willful violation of civil liberties that we have seen in this case.
No, and that's why it's so important for all the American people. Because yesterday it's Cliven Bundy, today it's you and your family, and God forbid that someone like Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders or that Pocahontas up there in Vermont or wherever she's from, Massachusetts, gets elected, Elizabeth Warren, as our next president. You will see tyranny like you have never, ever seen in this country. The federal government will be crushing you. So go to freedomwatchusa.org. Contribute to our cause. We have a Freedom of Information Act case on behalf of the Bundys. And go to clivenbundydefensefund.org, clivenbundydefensefund.org, because I've been assisting Cliven Bundy in my private capacity, and we need your help. We've got a long road ahead of us. It's not over. This is going to be a fight to the very end. Even if Cliven is dismissed, the indictment, the superseding indictment with prejudice, they're going to be coming back for him, because they made him the poster boy. In fact, there were posters hanging on the wall of BLM. This whistleblower, Larry Wooten, pointed out, kill this, kill the Bundys. Yesterday, it's Cliven Bundy. Tomorrow, it can be you and your family. And that's the importance of this case. And that's why I put in so much of my time here. I consider this to be the most important case I've ever participated in. Even though I have 3 lawsuits on behalf of Cliven, even though I'm still fighting to get into the criminal prosecution. Hopefully it'll be over soon and it won't matter. But I'm doing everything I can behind the scenes with a lot of people there to get the job done and to get this matter dismissed. We'll be right back with more from Larry Klayman and Bob Barr.
Before he was a trial lawyer, he sliced him and diced him.
People used to ask me, Larry, what caused you to start Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch, given the powerful forces in this country that put you at risk?
In a meat packing plant.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
A very special prosecutor, Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
Talking about the violation of civil liberties, of the Constitution, there's something which is looming on the horizon right now. It's the reauthorization of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. It's also the violation of the USA Freedom Act. As people know, as American people know, we at Freedom Watch enjoined the National Security Agency and the Obama administration on 2 occasions from conducting mass surveillance on the American people without probable cause. And in fact, the judge on that case, Richard Leon, found that the government had not caught one terrorist with this mass surveillance. But we know that Section 702 has been abused because this is when you make a phone call overseas. It gives the intelligence agencies the so-called right to intercept that telephone call and do it without probable cause, even if you're an American citizen. And we know that that was used against President Trump and the Trump Tower. It unmasked, later it resulted in the unmasking of phone calls that the Trump campaign made with regard to overseas calls. It may have resulted in the ultimate indictment of General Mike Flynn, and it's likely that calls were unmasked under Section 702 with regard to the Attorney General, and that may be why he's so timid in pushing hard. But I wanted to get Bob's thoughts as well on this because he's a civil libertarian, and he agrees with me that we cannot have this mass surveillance. And this act is set to be reauthorized, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act 702, in January of this year. Bob?
Thank you, Larry. You've put your finger on another important civil liberties matter, and that is so-called Section 02 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which has been used by now 3 administrations to gather information from electronic communications on American citizens by the millions without any court order, which would normally be required, as you know, under the Fourth Amendment. Very few people outside of you and I and, of course, government officials and civil liberties lawyers really understand this. The average American has very little idea, if any, what the NSA, the National Security Agency, does, much less what the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act does, and even less what Section 702 does. But every American ought to be concerned about it because it provides a back door to warrantless electronic surveillance, not just of communications that an American citizen might make overseas, but communication internally if that communication triggers some key word that the government at NSA has put into its system as important to terrorism or criminal investigations. So Rand Paul and several others in the Senate and the House have been fighting this. The latest deadline for reauthorization is January 19th. It may be extended again. The administration claims in a convoluted and I think unlawful interpretation of the law that it can continue to do this until April. But regardless of what the deadline is, every American needs to be concerned about this, and we need to do everything we can, as I know you're doing, to educate the American public as to the dangers of continuing Section 702 surveillance powers.
Yes, and in addition to the education, we actually have lawsuits still pending. There's a new one that I brought on my own behalf, and whistleblower Dennis Montgomery, he's been on our show, who was an NSA, CIA contractor. He left with 600 million pages of information, some of it classified, about the gross abuse that was going on. And this lawsuit is going through the courts. We've been successful in 2 prior lawsuits, so we're hopeful that the court will put an end to this as well. But, I urge President Trump to educate himself on this because he's been poorly advised by the CIA director, Mike Pompeo. Bob, by the way, was also with the CIA a number of years ago, a very deep background. And he's being misinformed as to the risks of this. And ironically, it was 702, which was used against him and his family and his associates on the Trump campaign. So the president needs to wake up on this and put a stop to this illegal abuse of our intelligence services. It's very dangerous. It's what used to go on in the Soviet Union and other places, using intelligence services against political opponents. I want to thank everybody for listening to our show in 2017. We're going to make it even better in 2018. Happy New Year to all, and God bless you all.